Welcome back to the Retire with Confidence podcast. It's important to realize that the world is not ending. And if it is, well, who cares? Let's all try to get to heaven and throw a party. But seriously, the world's not ending. It might seem like it when you turn on the TV and watch the news, but really there's a lot more good going on than bad. It just doesn't always get reported. I mention this in the light of planning and especially with investments. We've just wrapped up 2023 and really a pretty good year overall for the stock market and for investments. Not across the board, but there is plenty of good going on. And we finished up with an overall good year. We had recorded some episodes early in 2023 and actually even in late 2022 that talked about not trying to fear recession, don't fear recession, don't try to forecast the market, all these types of things. Because 2022 was a pretty bad year for the market. And we were coming into 2023 with just this huge amount of negativity about all the things that could go wrong and why the stock market's a terrible place to be. And yeah, it might be a good long-term thing, but nah, not right now. All this stuff's going to go bad. And instead, perhaps even in spite of some things not going well, we actually had a really, really good year overall in the stock market. I had an interesting conversation in the fall because the market did take a tumble in that September, October timeframe. And somebody mentioned, they said, well, gosh, what's up with this stock market? It's kind of rough. I said, no. Yeah, it's having a little bit of trouble. And this person said, yeah, it just keeps going down. I wish we could have a good year. And I said, well, what do you mean? What do you think a good year is? And he said, wow, I just want some positive returns. Now keep in mind at this point, this was in the fall, so the market had been dropping, but really the S&P 500 at that point was probably up around 15%, roughly, which is a fantastic year. And so it was really interesting to be talking with this person and just hearing that mindset of, man, this market's awful, when in fact it's been a great year. It just maybe didn't feel like it, or maybe there was just a lot of noise out there in terms of what could go right versus what could go wrong. And I think that's one of the challenges as an investor and in doing planning, to understand that if you were to make a list of, gee, what could go wrong? People can come up with just this long list of, oh my gosh, there could be a war, Congress could screw stuff up, inflation's out of control, I can't buy a house, all this stuff. If you had to sit down and think about, gee, what could go right? It's a lot harder to come up with a list. And I think part of that's just because things go right a lot more often than we think. We just don't really recognize it in the moment. I'll use the analogy of a referee or an umpire. They make a lot more correct calls than incorrect calls, but obviously the incorrect ones get noticed a lot more often because they're incorrect and they impact the game and all that sort of stuff. I feel like that's a pretty good analogy for what we see in the news or just feel like we experience in life. Really, as we're going through life, there's a lot of good things that are happening and that could happen, will happen, but oftentimes we focus on all the things that are not going right. And that bleeds over especially into planning and investing and taxes and all that. When if you got the news turned on, they're going to tell you everything that's going wrong and why things are messed up and screwed up. And they're maybe not going to highlight, like, hey, companies are actually doing well. Wow, look at that. Inflation might be dropping. You might see some headlines on that. But there's so much about what could go wrong and how awful things are and wow, watch out for the future. Maybe it's time for us to say, something could go right, Everything might actually be okay. Or even if things do go wrong, maybe they aren't as bad as we fear that they will be. So it's just an important message for today. We came into 2023 with a lot of negativity and wound up having a fantastic year overall for the stock market and for investments. So let's temper our negativity a little bit. Realize that things aren't always going to work out perfectly, for sure. But there's really very few times in recent history, or even heck over the long term, where we've had big things go wrong. Thinking 2008, 2009, financial crisis, obviously, super high inflation in the 70s, Great Depression, all these things were big events. But they were very infrequent. In a lot of cases, we didn't even see them coming. They weren't all the things that we were worried about in the first place. So it's important to realize that outside of a handful of events, things tend to go right, and the world is not ending. So as we go into 2024, let's try to keep that frame of reference. Stay positive. Always stay watchful of things that can go wrong. There's nothing wrong with doing that. Let's realize that maybe this thing that I feared so much might not be as bad as it seems in my mind. Everything might work out. Let's move forward with a little bit more positivity and being constructive on life in general, but certainly on planning and investments. Really, we're just trying to sidestep major stuff like bank catastrophes in 2008 and 2009. We want to step aside from that for sure. But otherwise, every single time since 2009 that we've worried about something going wrong and maybe even seen a sharp drop in the stock market, every single time that has been a buying opportunity. All of it. So if we look at this over the long term, let's stop fearing these short-term things and realize that over the long term, things are probably going to be just fine. We'll figure it out, especially if we're doing planning. We'll plan around what can go wrong, mitigate those things, and get you to a good spot. So let's stay positive. Let's focus on what could go right and what is going right, perhaps more than focusing on what might go wrong.